Hello, everyone. Welcome to the closing ceremony. It's kind of hard to follow Youssou N'Dour, so I'm not even going to try. But he is incredible, isn't he? He really livens up a room, had an incredible message on Africa and Africa's history, Africa's potential, where we've been and where we're going. I'm from Kenya myself, so I found it moving and I found it inspirational. Well, I hope all of you have had a fantastic 2 days and that you've had a chance to meet new people, exchange ideas, business cards, and I hope every single person in this room got a chance to take the selfies out there with the really cool She Is We camera, right? So I just want to spend a little bit of time giving you a flavor of the last few days and just kind of highlighting some of the key takeaways from the conference and some of the things that you can go home with, reflect on, but also take action with. What is it that you can go away and do? So there are 5 Ps that I'm sure you're all by now familiar with that are partnership, people, peace, planet. I'm missing one. Does anyone remember that? Prosperity. Thank you. So I'd like to summarize each area and just kind of tie things together. Because when you're at events like this, there's a lot of great conversation. There were so many booths, speeches, people offering their experiences and their views. But not always is there a forum that kind of encapsulates everything editorially as to what were the things that the people in the booth or the panels that you were not attending actually talking about. So I'd like to start with partnership. And these were some of the themes that emerged. That gender equality is not just a moral and a fairness issue, it's also really important for economic development. Greater gender equality means transforming definitions of power, of leadership, and authority. And obviously at the core of all of this was about the need for women to mobilize and network and connect to promote gender equality, but there was a lot of conversation around the role of men and what is it that men can do to push this agenda forward. There was some discussion too on the fairer distribution of time and labor between women and men that would actually benefit both sexes and allow more women to participate in decision making. And at the opening ceremony here, I mean, it strikes me also when the Norwegian Prime Minister had talked about how she forced the men in her office, and as many men as she could, to take paternity leave when it was due to them. And it really resonated with the audience at the time. The next P is peace. You know, I'm a former journalist and I've covered a lot of wars in my life, and there's one very clear theme is that they're pointless and they destroy the fabric of societies, and it is women that pay the highest price. So when it comes to making peace, what we've learned from the last few days in all our conversations are these following themes. Even when laws and policies that exist to promote gender equality are in place, it's really the mindsets of individuals themselves, of people, that have to change. It's important too to support feminist movements, but one striking fact is that half of the young feminist groups were operating with a budget of less than $5,000, and a quarter of the women's groups were operating with budgets of less than 500 euros or dollar estimates. So they really do need our support, more so than ever. Girls are key to change, yet they're still invisible, including in the SDGs and human rights law. So giving them a voice and providing them with platforms is essential. When it comes to preventing conflict, international organizations should also rely more from early warnings from women's groups on the ground, because that really offers a very vital source of information. You always hear those sorts of early signs and signals and rumblings, and you know, it's not always taken note of as soon as it can be. Sexual violence and conflicts have to be prosecuted, and there needs to be an end to impunity, and that survivors should be at the center of all the kind of work that's being done on the prevention and the response to gender-based violence. They are the experts and they are the peacemakers, so they have to be front and center of the effort. The next P is people. And I, for one, was really struck by what Natalie Roby Tingo, who is actually one of the young leaders that was here from my home country, Kenya, had said yesterday. And we see it all the time at home, but she was so poignant and emotional about it. She said, "I am out of tears to cry at funerals of girls we are burying because of female genital mutilation." She said, "It's high time leaders are held accountable for implementing the laws against FGM and child marriage." So, what was really shocking about what we learned over the last couple of days is the cost to developing the economies of violence against women. The costs are going to run into the trillions of dollars by 2030. But the lifelong effects of sexual violence, including female genital mutilation, on a woman's life can never be quantified. Although violence and child marriage is going down, there still is caseloads of affected girls that are going up just simply because of the growing and exploding demographics. So it's really only concerted action by all of us that will end these harmful practices. 214 million women in developing countries want to avoid pregnancy, but they lack access to modern contraception. Over 45 million receive inadequate or no prenatal care. Sexual and reproductive health is a rights issue that was profoundly discussed across panels and in conversations in the booths and just out here, and that it should not be seen only as a gender issue or a health issue, because empowering women through access to information and services that are free of stigma and free of coercion is really vital. Family planning for females under 18 is an important but contentious issue that needs addressing, and here contraception was talked about as being a very cost-effective policy. And an interesting factoid that was picked up also from conversations was that it's just $9 a person per year, $9 to ensure women's sexual and reproductive health. But right now, you've really only got half of that amount that's been invested. So, that was quite a poignant piece of data that I think we can all go and think about. The next P is planet. And I actually, before I go into what we garnered from conversations, that I just want to salute some of the very brave women that I've met here and have observed both over the years as well as been introduced to at this event, but who really put their lives on the line to protect life on this planet. There was a ranger at Virunga National Park, her name is Jolie Kavugo, who said, "We are committed, we rangers are committed. We give our body and our soul, and if need be, we will die for this park." And it's people like her that make all the difference. Every time I go home to Nairobi, I spend a lot of time at Karura Forest. And you'll remember Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I remember growing up, and I remember what she had to go through. I remember waking up as a child and seeing her in hospital, all beaten up, and the way that she was mistreated by the authorities at the time. But today, it's our central park. It's the most glorious thing we have in terms of protecting life on our planet. So the takeaways that were shared when it came to protecting the planet is this: 70% of decisions about household consumption are made by women. So it's women that should drive the change. Half the world's population cannot be left out of climate change solutions. Greater women's participation can increase the pace and the sustainability of the energy transition. All international environmental agreements now have gender action plans. So that's pretty awesome, right? So the challenge now, this little challenge, is to go and implement them. And that's the next step, is to be committed to finding ways in a resolute fashion to actually go ahead and implement them. And everybody in this room has demonstrated the commitment to do that. And finally, on that point, promoting access to land and financial inclusion of women and girls in rural areas was important, as well as responsible private investments. The final point, the final P, is prosperity. And these were the themes that emerged. If we want to close the gender gap, we have to make sure that women are economically empowered through education, capacity building, access to finance, health, social protections, and we have to make sure that the private sector is on board. Discriminatory legislation and customs need to be eliminated. The global economy loses trillions of dollars just because of the wage differential between men and women. Women need to be in political positions, so half the world's population can be fully represented and part of the decision-making and the influential structure of countries and of regions. On the issue of migration, that puts women in vulnerable situations. We've heard a lot about that over the past 2 days, but migration could also be an opportunity for migrant women to become economically and socially independent. Human trafficking must be criminalized from beginning to end, which is obviously a large portion of the discussion that we encountered over the last couple of days. So we all have a lot of work to do, but I think we really had a very productive 2 days, and it was really amazing to listen to people's experiences, ideas, and for me, this being my first one, just the enthusiasm and the commitment around this. You know, you have such incredible stories to tell. This is the journalist part of me, you know, and often the stories and the characters that drive them don't get told. So how are we going to move forward, do the work, but also make sure that we tell our stories and the world knows about the incredible work that's being done by everybody here in this room and beyond. I'd like to now introduce to you, it gives me great pleasure, to invite Her Royal Highness Mary, Crown Princess of Denmark, to say a few words. Her Royal Highness is going to focus on how we can better protect our planet, the first P.
Good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to participate in the closing of the European Development Days 2018. The theme, Women and Girls at the Forefront of Sustainable Development, is one that should be a given, or at least an irreplaceable piece of a larger puzzle to ensure our planet's sustainable future. I've been asked to speak to one of the 5 Ps of the 2030 Agenda, namely planet, what's next, and I will do this primarily through the perspective of women and girls, but also with the recognition that you can't speak about one P without speaking about the others. So allow me to say up front that equal opportunities for all and gender equality is, according to my conviction, one of the most important things that we can do to improve the world. It is essential that men and women can contribute equally at home, at work, and in the public life to the benefit of our societies, our economies, and ultimately to the benefit of our planet. We are determined to protect the planet from degradation. This statement is part of the common vision of the 2030 Agenda. The world has made this promise. In 2015, the world also agreed on another visionary global framework of immense importance to current and future generations, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Together, they set ambitious, interdependent, and mutually supportive goals and targets for sustainable development and for the transformation of the way we live, produce, and consume. We sometimes say about dreamers that they're on another planet, and often they are, But we do need dreams, visions, and actions to ensure this planet is prosperous, peaceful, and sustainable. We have for too long lived with overconsumption, uncontrolled growth, and exhaustion of the planet's resources. So the world, we, the people of the world, need to make the strongest possible effort to meet the promises made, to protect the planet, remedy our wrongdoings, and secure the future of our planet that gives us life. And girls and women are also key in this human endeavour. Climate change is now affecting every country, on every continent. People all over the world are experiencing the significant impacts of climate change. People are losing their homes, their lands, and their livelihoods. Climate change is also a multiplier for the global challenges we face. The success of the 2030 Agenda is obviously dependent on how we combat climate change. While the impacts of climate change are global, the hardest hit are most often the poor and the most vulnerable. And among them, there is an overrepresentation of women and girls. They have fewer opportunities to adapt, to build their resilience, or to move from affected areas. In developing countries, as we know, women are often responsible for the provision of firewood and water for the household, and they often spend the majority of their time in the fields and at market for their families. Such activities are highly affected by climate change. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks reports have consistently ranked water crisis amongst the greatest risks to the economies, the environments, and people. When there is too little water, it affects consumption, food production, and with it nutrition and health conditions are weakened. When flooding appears, it brings about problems. The spreading of diseases increases, crops are devastated, and everyday tasks, such as going to market, are almost made impossible as roads become impassable. Every time the activities that women and girls are in charge of become harder and more time-consuming, it increases the unpaid workload for them. Unfortunately, this can eliminate the last bleak possibility for those affected of gaining access to education or to entering the world of paid work. When women have opportunities to become part of the formal labour market, they are better able to support their families, and they invest in their children's health and education and postpone the marriage of their own children. We all recognise the power of education. But let me give you an example. According to Women Deliver, every additional year of schooling for a girl increases her future income by 10 to 20%. Education lays the foundation for girls and women to achieve their full potential. Women with more years of education have fewer and healthier children and actively manage their reproductive health. Few things have greater impact on a woman's life than the number and spacing of her children. It is a basic human right to make decisions about our own bodies, to decide freely how many children we want to have, when to have them, and with whom to have them. Yet many women still lack access to quality services and supplies needed to manage their fertility. Statistics point to a large unmet need for access to contraception, and that unmet need leads to a larger number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions. Ensuring greater access to and getting more women to use modern contraceptions save lives and allows people to fulfil their potential. And ultimately, that benefits the planet. Educated girls realise higher wages and greater upward mobility. Education also builds up resilience and equips girls and women to face the impacts of climate change. They can more effectively manage food, soil, trees and water, even as nature cycles change. and they are better able to cope with the devastation from natural disasters and extreme weather. According to Project Drawdown, education is considered the sixth most important solution for reversing global warming. Education is not a privilege, it is a human right. We must ensure that the 62 million girls around the world that meet barriers preventing them from going to school, help them to gain access and thereby claim their right to education. Education is also an accelerator for enabling women to fully participate in public life and thereby be part of the leadership and decision-making bodies within their communities and beyond. Women and men have different needs, interests, perspectives, and priorities. By women claiming their rightful place in leadership, we can expect to see a stronger representation of women's needs and concerns, which ultimately results in better and more nuanced decisions that more adequately reflect the needs and interests of the community, children and families, and that of course includes men. Or you could say that diversity in leadership and decision-making positions is a necessary precondition for the proper functioning of democracy. It is beyond doubt that women's economic empowerment and equal and full participation at all levels of society is as essential for the sustainable development of our planet. Sustainable development is everyone's responsibility. Governments, the private sector, organisations, civil society, and you and me. We have the responsibility to pave the way for greater gender equality. This responsibility must be reflected in political dedication, public commitment and legislation. But it also takes sharing of knowledge and experience, best practices and inspiration if we are to fulfil the potential of every girl and boy, woman and man. And in this regard, the European Development Days has taken us a step further. There is no easy solution. Lack of equal opportunities is characterised by many different and complex factors. In order to achieve the real change we desire, I would like to mention an aspect which I find extremely important. We need greater focus on the role of social norms and unconscious biases and the barriers they present. For example, our social norms in many ways influence women's economic opportunities. They frame a woman's choice of education or no education. And among the women who do enter the world of paid work, they influence her career choices. We need to become conscious of our unconscious biases and knowledgeable about the effect they have on our decision-making. We need to eliminate structural and legal obstacles that hinders women's full participation. If we do, we can transform the power held by women and girls into social and economic gains. We must ensure that no recommendation, no policy guidance and no solution is developed without considering the outcomes for women and girls and also the gains that can be derived from their empowerment. Sustainable development for people, planet and prosperity provides new opportunities for growth. It will require partnerships across continents, regions and countries, between the public and private sectors. It will require new business models and new ways of thinking. It will require designing new solutions that are both commercially viable as well as delivering value to society. Governments alone cannot reach the level of investment required to achieve the SDGs. Therefore, the private sector is vital to driving success. And this takes us back to what I mentioned before, the responsibility that we all have to act. The planet cannot wait for legislation, policies, and regulations. We need to ask ourselves, where can we and where do we have a responsibility to reduce our social and environmental footprints, and where lies our opportunities for positive impact? I'd like to share with you an example from an industry's growing recognition of its own responsibility and the need to transform, namely the fashion industry, one of the world's largest consumer industries. The fashion industry is huge, and it continues to grow rapidly. It's not just big in terms of revenue, it also employs 60 million people worldwide, with the majority of them being women, and where worker safety and the human costs of cheap, fast fashion continue to be problematic issues. It is also one of the most resource-intensive industries in the world and leaves large environmental, social, and ethical footprints. The industry is also faced with the realities of planetary resources like water and land becoming increasingly limited, consumers increasingly insisting on sustainable practices, employees rightfully demanding safer working conditions, and owners and shareholders seeking to protect the long-term viability of their investments. So the industry has been asking itself, how do we design a fashion industry for the future that respects and protects the environment, reduces existing inequalities, and is profitable? Since 2009, I've been involved in the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, which is now held annually in Copenhagen. It is the platform for discussing the complex challenges facing the industry, how can they collaborate in such a competitive environment, and the development of solutions to transform the industry, transform the way we produce, market, and consume fashion. Copenhagen Fashion Summit is an important global event and a platform for accelerating the industry's commitment to change. I attended the most recent summit just last month, and it was clear that industry leaders and a large portion of the industry is at a point where it has taken ownership of its responsibility, and that although transformation is happening, it also recognizes that it's happening too slowly. With such a complex production network, it will take time. Luckily, we're witnessing a sense of momentum building. There's also a recognition that the existing sustainable solutions and business models, even under optimistic assumptions, will not deliver the impact needed to foolproof the industry for the future. A deeper change is needed to secure long-term sustainable growth and profitability. And it will require new technologies and models that are just beginning to merge. Innovation is about creating new social and economic value. And the industry recognizes the need to innovate and invest jointly to target the unsolved challenges in the value chain with new solutions. And that all players within the industry have to join together in order to create an ecosystem that supports transformational innovation and disruptive business models. It is important that we see the enormous challenges facing our planet as an exciting moment in our development to transform the way we live, consume, produce, and grow for the future. We all have a responsibility for our common future. It is not a responsibility we can choose to take. It is simply a responsibility we have. Because remember, there is no planet B. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Royal Highness, for your kind words and insights into the first P that we discussed in some depth, planet. I'd like to now invite our four speakers that are going to participate in our closing debate, and I'd like them to join me up here, join me here up on stage. I'd like to invite Jayathma Wickramanayake, the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, the first ever, please. Dennis Mukwege, world-renowned gynecologist and founder of the Mukwege Foundation. Nidhi Goyal, disability and gender rights activist and stand-up comedian, Saskia van Uffelen, the CEO of Ericsson in Belgium and in Luxembourg. Please join us on stage. Since much of the discussion has been about including the voices of women and giving women the microphone, I thought 2 microphones would be better than 1. But let me pass this along to you, if you don't mind just taking this, Nidal. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to start the discussion here, actually with Jaya, if you don't mind. How is it that women, young women, can get more actively involved in politics and in society, from what you've seen in your experiences?
Yes. First of all, before I start, I want to give a big shout out to all the young people who participated in the European Development Days in the last 2 days. It's been incredible to see the work you are doing, and to know that, every morning when we wake up, the image portrayed of young people is being lazy and always being on our phones and not doing anything about the society. To really see that you are making change and to break those myths and misconceptions about young people was incredibly inspiring.
Aren't they socially mobilizing on the phones?
Exactly, that's what we are doing. To come back to your question, Zain, I want to go back to a little experience that I had before joining the United Nations in my home country, Sri Lanka, where I mobilized young people to build an organization, or rather a movement called Hashtag Generation, exactly about converting those hashtags that we use in social media into concrete action. And one of the things we wanted to do was to mobilize as many as young women to run for political office. I was really inspired by this article that I read on a newspaper that Sri Lanka produced world's first female head of state, or the first female prime minister, back in 1956. But at that point, we only had 5% of women in the parliament. That meant about 13 out of 225. And apart from one woman who was a celebrity, all the other 12 were either the wives or sisters of dead politicians. So I remember turning to my mother and saying, Amma, if their brothers and fathers were alive, they might not even be in the parliament right now. So this got me thinking along with my friends, and we did a little bit of research to see why aren't women running for political office, or why aren't they active, as you say, in political life. And we found that it is not because young women didn't want to run for office or didn't want to actively participate in civic life, but because there were barriers that prevented them from doing so. Most of them were social, where the society or their families or people around them telling them that politics was not a good vocation for a woman. Also, most of them didn't have money. They were not economically empowered to run for political office, to mobilize campaigns and do advertising on mainstream media. And third barrier was that the political parties were not accessible to young women. None of the political parties in my country had, I don't think they still do, have women in leadership positions in the political parties.
So how do we change that?
Exactly. So we saw young people, and we see everywhere in the world, trying to sort of knock on the doors of our formal political institutions and formal political parties to say, we are here, we are ready to take up the challenge, give us some space. But unfortunately, we don't see that space being created. So what I observe right now is, similar to all the young people who were present here, young people are now finding alternative ways of participation. If you see the women's marches that we had all across the globe, if you saw what happened, for an example, during the Arab Spring, how young women came out to the streets demanding for their voices to be heard. If you saw how in the March for Our Lives in the United States, how 13-year-old, 14-year-olds came to the streets, I think that's how our generation has chosen to participate politically in life.
Nidhi, how do you see it? How can we ensure that more women are at the table, given what we've just heard from Jaya, and given that we're also talked a lot about partnerships here?
Okay. Thank you so much, Jane. I think speaking after Jaya is totally... but I believe that when we're talking about whose voices are heard, and who are the women at the table? I have a couple of primary questions. The first is, who do we consider to be women? And this is a very, very basic question, and we say women are women, but are we really looking at voices of women from rural areas? Are we looking at voices of indigenous women? Are we really listening to the voices of the women with disabilities who cannot maybe speak? Are we accepting the woman who says, I feel like a woman and I'm a trans woman, right? So what's the kind of diversity that we accept within this label of women? And then when we're talking about voices, whose voices are we hearing anyway? And so the three things that come to my mind around getting more people at the table is understanding intersectionality a little more, breaking this understanding of hierarchy and thinking of heterogeneity. And I'll just elaborate a little more on what do I mean. When I say intersectionality, I really mean collaborating with movements that we may not think are directly women's rights movement. So when we talk about collaborating with other movements, so for a long time, women with disabilities slipped between the cracks because there was a disability rights movement and there was a women's rights movement, and there was a youth movement, which was a separate movement. There is a sexual and reproductive health rights movement, which is a separate movement. But what we sometimes, and it's difficult because conversations become difficult, is that all these movements have this common element of women and girls in it. So really thinking about intersectional existences, because our identities are really layered.
How do we make it practical? Give me like an example of what you think, given your background and your experiences, that will practically work, that we can go home and rethink relationships and partnerships with other movements.
I think just beginning with, we don't have to have a huge list. If we all go and evaluate which are the spaces that we occupy, are we making that spaces accessible? And when we say access, what does that access mean? Who are the people we are intentionally including? So, for example, we had a gathering of women with disabilities, and there was a trans woman with a disability. And there was a presentation that needed to be made, and we said, okay, we're all here, and we're women with disabilities. Two of us will just make that presentation to the larger non-disabled women's rights forum. And then some of us stood up and said, but within us, there is an invisibility of trans women with disabilities. So why don't we share this platform, which also belongs to her or them, with the larger forum, and that might show, various existences that are there. So I think intentionally creating spaces, and sustainable development goals are a very, very classic example of this. All the goals are gender sensitive, but we have a goal 5. And that's to say that gender equality is important. Although all the sets of goals have to be gender sensitive, we put our foot down and say this is an intentional thing that we need to do. So really having that intent is important.
And I'd like to bring Dennis into the conversation here. If we could just pass him the microphone. Thank you very much. I mean, you've created a space for women in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have a hospital that you established since 1999 in Bukavu that's taken care of about at least 50,000 survivors of sexual violence. You're doing some incredible work. Could you tell us? Yeah, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell us from your perspective, from what you see every day when dealing with survivors of sexual violence, what are some of the actions that need to be taken to reduce these shocking numbers?
Merci.
Thank you. In 1989, I took care of the first woman. I was shocked to see a woman who'd been raped in such a state. She'd been raped so violently. When she left the hospital, I'd operated on her, I'd done everything that was necessary. But the hospital is not a place of peace where a woman can remain forever. I asked this woman to go back to her village. And I remember very well when the UNICEF, the organization came to transport her there, she was crying and she looked at me in my eyes and she said to me, "You're abandoning me." I felt that I'd done my work, my job, and she had to go back to her village with her baby. Now, this woman came back 12 years later with her daughter that I saw her born in the hospital, who'd also been raped and was also pregnant. And I had no words at that point. It was extremely difficult, but I was seeking words to try and encourage these two people. But when the girl came back to the hospital 3 years later with her 2-year-old child who had also been raped, now for me that was the proof of incapacity, of failure, and I understood that I could no longer stay in a hospital, in the operating theatre, operating on these people. I had to do more. So the feeling I have today is that we are just dealing with the consequences, but we've got to go beyond the consequences. You know why these women undergo these rapes. But you have three generations. You can't keep carrying on doing what you are doing. Otherwise, it just gives you a feeling of failure.
When you want to address those root causes that lie, predominantly in conflict, for example, in the DRC, how do you address them? Like, what is it that you can practically tell us today needs to be done based on your experiences and on their stories?
Le viol dans le conflit, ce n'est pas un problème spécifique.
Rape during conflict is not something limited to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I was with the laureates of the Sakharov Prize, Nadia Moravia, and I think that when you listen to them talk, at the end of the day, you say, in conflicts, it's as if rape has become a weapon par excellence. When you know that the origin of this is conflict, it's war, you can't limit yourself to treating the consequences. So I took the option of starting, first of all, locally for consciousness raising. I've done it on the national level, but it's extremely difficult because today, who's fighting? Well, unfortunately, it's the soldiers themselves that are doing this. And it's very difficult to get this through to the people who are the authors of the crimes. You've got no proof, but they are the soldiers, they are the belligerents. I went to the European Union, I've gone to the international community, I've gone to the UN. I've spoken to most of the European parliaments just to simply express this deep need. Women have the right to live. We cannot accept that war that is caused and created by men is carried out on women's bodies.
We've heard some strong sentiments about 4 of the P's. The 5th is prosperity, and I'd like if you could address Saskia and just pass Saskia the microphone also. How do we, for example, harness the digital economy today to be more inclusive of women and to encourage women in entrepreneurship and their own prosperity?
Well, let me first start in presenting myself. You present me as a CEO of Ericsson, which is true, but the first reason why I'm here is, together with my husband, I'm mother of 5 children, of 3 girls. And like you said, I thought at a certain moment in time it should be finished in complaining. What can I do? And maybe I have to do more in order to make a society which is inclusive for all. And certainly if you don't then talk about a technical world, the first thing is, then let's take a role model. And it's very warm in here, and the reason is not because the airco is not working. The reason is because there's a lot of passion and energy of fantastic role models, female and male, in this room, which that can change the world. So maybe that is my biggest passion. Now, specifically coming into the technology part, like mentioned also in the introduction, and I think announced today, the future is a connected world. Now, we can see it as a bad thing, or we can see it as a positive thing. And I still remember when I started with Ericsson in 2014, we had just done a program where we introduced mobile payment for women in needing countries, because it's the one who is managing the money who will be the possibility also to make the difference. And if we do it in mobile payment, then at least it cannot disappear in whatever other... and we started to create a culture of confidence of women, seeing possibilities, creating startups, being entrepreneurship, and maybe that is an example of prosperity. But for that part, we also have a big responsibility on getting the necessary skills and competences, which is referred to. And when I was talking to my boy when he was 15, and I was talking about ICT and digital, he already was saying that's for nerds. So we lose out in the economy and we lose out in the society the most of the young women and the most of the girls. And that is in different domains, and I've seen a lot of initiatives which is touching one of them. The first one for me, and that's to the deepest of my heart, is the inclusivity. In a connected world, the only way in getting everybody part of this world is also getting them connected to that with the right competences. The second part, and you gave an example of fashion, we always read that digital transformation will have a negative impact on employment. Yes, it will have a negative impact on employment if we do not take action today. But if we retrain all those women who are employed today, but do not necessarily have the right competences which we will need in a connected world, then the problem will tomorrow even be higher.
What are those competences?
Well, you can, and I will give some examples. If you talk about ecosystems and partners, it's about daring to do things out of the box. It's about daring to think innovative and creative. How can we not wait the rules and the regulations, but how can we do it already ourselves? How can we better be inspiring storytellers? How can we motivate people around us? How can we create new financial models? And let that all be examples of female competences, which sometimes a man has also. But besides all technical aspects, it's also those competences which are critical in the society. And then to answer, obviously, yes, we also need to learn them in blockchain. We also need to learn them in artificial intelligence. We also need to learn and adapt the education system to those new technologies. But it is only a part of the digital transformation we are confronted with. And to my opinion, losing out the majority of the population, not having an inclusive image, will really create more troubles for tomorrow, or, positive said, would create a big solution if we can include them in the society of tomorrow.
Jaya, how do you see it?
No, I have to say I completely agree. One of the ways that, for an example, I propose most of the times when I meet policymakers, ministers, or those who are responsible for decision making, is to also see how we make sure that young people today are equipped with the necessary skills and expertise to be able to deliver, or to be able to be matching with those skill sets that will be needed in the future. I mean, a recent World Bank report said, a World Economic Forum report said that 35% of the skills that are relevant today are not going to be relevant in 5 years' time. So what do we teach young people? How do we empower young people? Are we giving them the necessary soft skills, the transferable, the adaptable skills for them to be able to be better employable in the future? But on the piece of the digital transformation and understanding that everything is going to be digitized at one point in the future, we have to also not forget the digital gender divide. How, let alone the digital literacy, how about 65 million girls are still not even going to basic primary school. So I think that we have to also use digital tools as a tool to bridge those inequalities as well.
What do you say to someone like Dennis, right, who is, given the kind of work that he's, involved in, can't even get to that stage yet because basic safety and security are not even in place?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think it's a lot of these issues has to be contextualized.
Right.
I mean, there is no one hat fits all model. And in those contexts, we have to make sure that whatever the partners that we are bringing to the table, either with the businesses, either the technology, or whatever the partner in society, that it is kind of also culturally and contextually applicable.
So I'd be interested to know from Dennis, what kind of partners do you need or want and are not getting?
Un jour, alors que nous avions la visite d'un
One day, when we had the visit of an official from the UN, after she spoke to the women, she asked an interesting question. She said, "What can I do for you? How can I help you?" And I saw one woman stand up. She was not very cultivated. She could barely read and write. And this woman, she moved me because she said, "You know, I know how to fish. I can catch fish, I can smoke it, and I can take it to the market. I know how to grow things. And when I grow things, I educate my children, I train them, I raise my family, and I ensure that they're not hungry when I work. But today, there's no safety. If I go to fish, I get raped. If I go to the market, I feel people on the road who rape me. I go into my garden and I get raped. I don't want to live of handouts. I want to live of my work. And in order to do that, I need peace." Now, giving that answer, I must say, I had tears in my eyes because I thought, at the end of the day, isn't the real partnership that of giving the woman the possibility to work for herself? They can work for themselves because they can, rather than keep them in a condition where they need charity, which is a condition that destroys them. Today, it's there. It's urgent. We've got to work towards peace. So all these women who today live of charity can take care of themselves. Thank you.
Nidhi, what do you think?
Thank you. So digitalization is empowering, and I don't think any of us are debating on that. But like Jaya said, contextual realities need to be kept in mind. So I'll give you an example from rural India. We could empower or amplify voices of women from the community through a whole network of digital journalism. And so they were trained over a period of a couple of months, and which went into years. And there was a whole network of women, barefoot journalists, who could come together and amplify their voices to raise issues from the communities that were not being spoken about before. So I think when we talk about building and amplifying voices, digitalization is extremely important. I'd like to flag a couple of things here, other than the contextual realities. One, for me, again, who has access to these digital spaces. And the overarching point of the couple of questions that I'm going to put forth is that, are we then mimicking some of the barriers or some of the issues that we have in our offline movements and convenings and gatherings or coming together? And do that then, how, if we don't address it in the digital spaces at this point, then won't it be too late to start with innovative technology, or what is the point of using innovative technology? So I will just give here two small examples. When we talk about innovation, it absolutely works for women in rural areas, in agrarian economies. There are women who are sharing their stories, who are learning how to engage with agriculture through digital means. There are women with disabilities who are accessing education, independence, connectivity through social media platforms and other apps and developments, etc. What is happening is that we're not looking again at universal access, and this concept of universal access keeps coming back, because once we think of universal access, we're looking at all the intersectionalities, we're looking at diversity, and we're definitely looking at inclusion. The second thing is a concrete example of a movement which was very popular through social media and digital platforms, the hashtag #MeToo movement. And all of us joined it, and it really empowered a lot of women to come out and speak up about the violence they faced. It helped women to disassociate themselves from the stigma, because a lot of stigma gets internalized. But this movement was not reflective of a lot of voices. And many of us did not step back and question, saying, where are these women whose voices are not being heard? Why are there a particular kind of women? Where is the diversity within these voices? Are we hearing enough of indigenous women? Are they facing? Because these questions can then bring us to question the power structures.
So how do you involve those marginalized voices in movements like that?
Intentional inclusion is all I would say. So first, mapping out, being conscious, and that's really important. That are we conscious and are we questioning? Because technology can be empowering, but are we questioning? Because somewhere what we're doing is invisibilizing the other power structures that exist. So we're looking at patriarchy in terms of men and women and that kind of a power relation. But are we looking at racism? Are we looking at tribal women and indigenous women, and then women with disabilities as well? So some young women, but also older women. So when we talk about age discrimination, what are the factors that we're bringing in? So again, the idea is that our movements, our digitalizations, our engagement with anything new has to be on the basis of universal access as a principle, for inclusion, and intentional inclusion as a step, or conscious inclusion as a step.
Saskia, you talked about the importance of inclusion also in the digital space and the financial space. What is your view on, or rather give us an example of something that you've seen work successfully that can be applied to people in the room who can perhaps implement it or take it away or develop a new partnership or do something cool or
do something cool. Be here. No, I'll try to give you two examples. And one is, besides my role at Ericsson, I'm also the digital champion for Belgium, so helping to sensibilize the smallest country we're sitting in doing that digital transformation. And that is a full European project, so we have easy to compare initiatives which have been taken in other countries. And what was said as, what is your perception of the 2 days? One of the feedback was, we have a lot of networking space. So the meeting rooms, okay, could be interesting, but having the possibility to get connected with each other and to learn, firstly, that I'm not the only one, but secondly, that maybe there is somebody who's doing almost the same thing, so maybe we can regroup and make one bigger thing. So what we have tried to do with the Digital Champions is to make a kind of an inventory on what are initiatives taken in different countries and we can repeat in our country. And I will take you a very simple one, which is called Coder Dojo, which is an initiative taken in 2013, and where we focus on getting kids to coding in all inclusivity we can imagine. And at a certain moments, it's all done by people in their spare time, with all goodwill and passion. And then we said, yeah, but now we have a problem. We have very difficult to touch the kids of immigrants. So we did whatever we could and we didn't reach on how can we touch the kids of immigrants. And then we said, but maybe we should convince the mothers of those immigrants that this is important for the children. So we started to doing Coder Dojos for women in order to be capable of reaching the kids. And if you see now, if you have it in one country, then it's more easy to repeat it, and things start spreading out in different countries. And I think that's also the force of this kind of initiative, is please sit together, look who can be your counterpart. It will also give you personally energy and proud in saying, I will continue, because sometimes it's a lonely day. But at the other hand, the more we do it and we make small initiatives bigger, they can become repeatable. And I will give you another example. At a certain moment in time, I've been to the townships in South Africa because it was organized CEO with kids. So I went with my 12-year-old daughter, and because I found that she also needed to see something outside of Belgium. And the thing we did is we have donated PCs that we have refurbished in Belgium, We've donated, but instead of donating it and then saying, I did something for the society, but I don't know what it brings to. So we went to the townships. The children of the CEOs had discussion with the kids in the townships so they could better connect with each other. We had, they had the moment with Desmond Tutu. We didn't have it because he thought the children were more important. But we also created containers with completely classrooms in the townships. And I think that's a very important one, is we do not want to bring the people from a region to another. No, you have to bring the solution to the region themselves. Right. And every container is really reaching out those people who need it, and they can start transforming their small ecosystem in order to make it better. And then the last point, it's not only about data and connectivity and social media, but it's also a lot of health. If we can't improve the health of the people in the world, then it will be very difficult to also work on the prosperity. And I think sometimes the digital capabilities and health are a little bit underestimated as a priority.
What you talked about, the physical spaces in this environment and the ability to connect and share thoughts and ideas. And I'm interested, Dennis, to get your perspective, given that sexual violence was such a pronounced topic that was addressed in these days. Are you satisfied with the kind of conversation that you've heard with the level of whether it's solutions being offered or the discourse and the discussion around an area that you're an expert in? Was it you satisfied? Do we need to do more, think better, think differently?
Indeed, I think the question of sexual violence, well, over the course of 2 days, we've heard a lot of interventions, but leaving, sometimes you like to leave with some good news, sometimes looking for the good news. It's difficult to say, well, when I get to the hospital, I meet women, and I could say to them, yes, things are changing. From now on, if someone commits a rape, he can't hide anymore. We will be able to punish them. So that is not really the case. So I can't really say that to these women. Even if you've been gang raped today, with the technology that we've discussed as well and the progress, we're capable of being able to bring elements to the justice system so that your suffering is recognized and it can be repaired, compensated for. And it's true. You get the impression that it is a known problem. We've reflected a lot on it today as well. We've spoken about new technologies. I think we need to look at how, well, the telephones and other technologies to do alerts, warnings when they're raped. All of these things are very good, but can we go so far that we say never again in conflicts and in conflict zone? Why people who commit rapes? Why, when they're known, so we can let them do this unpunished? I think if we can't say no more, unfortunately this will go on. People will go on unpunished, sadly.
A final thought, and perhaps Nidhi, I can start with you. You once said, could we have the microphone this way, please? Thank you, Dennis. You once said to do comedy, you need to be strong enough. Now you regret saying this. You know, she's an excellent comedian. To do comedy, you need to be strong enough to point to the elephant in the room, which everyone is pretending is not there. So, what is the elephant in this room?
Wow.
Quick final thought.
I think there's still some sense of internalized hierarchy in the room. And I think till we don't completely consciously break that down, partnerships and inclusion will not happen. But I also feel for changing of mindsets, for questioning what we have internalized. And when I say hierarchy, it's hierarchy not just within actors, but hierarchy of movements, hierarchy of experiences, hierarchy of issues. So we're okay talking a lot about sexual violence. We're not so still okay about centering sexual and reproductive rights if it's not associated to health. So for me, it's really about all of this, all the P's, all the goals, all the activism, all the work by states. Everything begins from a transformation of social attitudes. And I think if panels, trainings, researches, and all the conventional methods fail, I think art is what comes to the rescue. And art has its own language to disrupt a lot of thoughts, to bring about a lot of change. And I think that's why I always say that we can change the world one smile at a time, with a lot of impact through comedy, through other forms of art. But I really feel that what we need to break down is internalized hierarchy and the understanding, deepen the understanding of heterogeneity of experiences and inclusion.
Thank you. Jaya, what, in your view, is the most important thing that we can take away from this conference, from your perspective?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of things that we can take away, but I want to maybe focus on one particular challenge that I face as a facilitator of young people's voices, the voices of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable at these decision-making platforms that we are talking about. So from a participation point of view, I want to kind of piggyback on what Nikki said in her first remark about, what is the platform we are creating? Is it really representative who are speaking here? So with regards to meaningful participation, I think there is this notion of kind of being a voice for the voiceless, and I think we really should get rid of that, and our empowered voices should never overpower the voices of the most marginalized, of the most vulnerable, who are own expertise of their lives and who have lived their own realities. So in doing so to bring the real stories to the decision-making tables, one of the reactions that I always get is that, but participation is expensive. And I really think if we are to really change these norms and these structures and barriers, then we have to put our money where our mouths are.
Saskia?
I'm a dreamer for the rest of my life, I think. But I'm a believer that in a world where everything is connected and everybody is connected, we have a huge opportunity. We have a huge opportunity to change some basics where we are now struggling for a few years with. And I'm a boomer. I'm born in the year that I'm born, so I'm not a digital native. But I'm a big believer of the young generation which is coming up. Listening to them, listening to their ideas, listening to daring to break silos, and that's as well in the industry as in the academic world as in the political world. I'm sometimes getting tired of listening too much to old people because they always repeat the same thing. I prefer to listen to a room with very young people who are doing things. And I hope that I can support that.
Thank you. And we've talked so much, finally, about the importance of including men in the conversation and boys. So I felt it only appropriate to end and give the final word of the conference here to Dennis. And what an incredible man you are. Please, could you offer us a final reflective thought to take away today?
First of all, I wanted to congratulate all women who managed to break through these silos with regard to rape. I think there's the Me Too campaign, which is quite encouraging because what protects, or anything that protects the people who commit rapes, it's the fact that women have to remain silent, and if they remain silent, it means that the act of rape will continue. It's a taboo. It remains taboo. Today, I think we need to give a significant place to all women wanting to break that silence and to change the norm and to start talking about rape as women able to denounce this phenomenon and who want it to stop. But remaining silence would be enabling it to continue, because rape or of neighbours or any other person could continue. For my part, I'm very happy to see that the world is moving, things are changing. And if we start denouncing these practices, I think we will get to a stage where this does not continue and a stop is put to it. Thank you.
Our excellent panelists, thank you for your insights and your thoughts. If I may request that you take your seats, and we'll continue to close the event. Thank you very much. Actually, yeah, go ahead. As you're coming off the stage and making your way to your chairs, thank you. I would just like to show you a brief video of some of the amazing thoughts of people and the images that we had over the past couple of days here at the European Development Days. Please watch.
Je voudrais d'abord, au nom de la Commission, vous souhaiter la bienvenue aux Journées européennes du développement. Ensemble, nous pouvons faire de grandes choses et ensemble, nous ferons de grandes choses. Merci.
Just a few images to share with everyone here and just really capture the energy of the past couple of days and reinforce just how amazing you are. So thank you for participating in this. And don't forget, a quick message here, if you've been having fun, don't forget there's still a cultural evening to go tonight. It is still happening. And I've been asked to let you know that the shuttle buses, as from 6:15, are going to continue their way to the concert. And finally, it's my privilege and pleasure to invite Nevin Mimica, the European Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development, to close the few days and share some of his thoughts with us. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear friends of development, dear friends of gender equality, it just remains for me to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for making this very special edition of the European Development Days such a success. Over the last 12 years, this gathering has grown from strength to strength, and this year was no exception. Perhaps more than any, this year's event has captured hearts and minds, because gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment is an issue which affects us all deeply. as fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, colleagues and global citizens. Over 8,000 global leaders, international organizations, businesses, grassroots activists, young leaders, journalists, and many more participated in our 120 sessions, special events, stands, exhibitions, and cultural program. More than 30,000 people actively engaged with us through social media and She Is We hashtag from all over the world. This global conversation on women's and girls' empowerment has been overwhelming, reaching over 300 million people around the world. Last year, our European Development Days were already voted the best event by EU Panel Watch. And this year, we have topped that, with women making up more than 60% of our panels. It has been a pleasure and privilege to be in the minority for a change. Together, we've discussed, debated, challenged, and shared experiences. We've heard about the obstacles and what we need to do to overcome them. And above all, we have celebrated the courage and power of women and girls to transform our world. Together, we have come a long way, including doubling the number of girls going to school and halving maternal and child mortality. But as we have heard over these last days, we still have a mountain to climb, to close the gender gap in all areas, and to protect every woman and girl from discrimination and harm. I trust that this closing session has underlined why happy, healthy, empowered women and girls are vital for a peaceful, prosperous, and promising future for all, and given us some concrete ideas on how to get there. Because when women are involved, peace lasts much longer, our planet is better protected, and our societies are more prosperous. Because women are more likely to invest in people and our future generations. And our partnerships are stronger, more representative, and more successful. But of course, the debate will not and cannot end here. I know and trust that every one of you here today will, like me, continue to do everything within your power to protect, empower, and invest in women and girls. It seems only fitting to close this year's European Development Days with an inspiring message from one of our brilliant former female young leaders, Vandinika from India. As she said, empowering young women to be bold and fearless will transform the fabric of our society, because those young women represent 3.5 billion opportunities for change. Thank you for helping us to make this change. We look forward to your actions and to welcoming you here again next year with, I hope, many positive stories of the difference we all made in the world for women, girls, and our communities. Thank you so much for the energy I felt all around the place during these 2 days, and this energy is still to lead us forward. Thank you.